Well, half of beef's fat is monounsaturated fat. That's the fat that a lot of people are seeking out. They're looking for olive oil. They're looking for monounsaturates to add to their diet. And half of beef's fat is monounsaturated fat. And I think that's just some basic knowledge and awareness that health professionals need and consumers need.
Hello, meat folks. Welcome back to the MeatsPad podcast. This is your hungry host, Phil Bass. And joining us today, we have Shalene McNeill. Shalene is with National Cattlemen's Beef Association, a registered dietitian.
Yes.
And thank you so much for joining us.
I am so happy to be here.
Me too. Me too. You know, so I just had the opportunity recently to listen to Shalene talk. And because of your background of nutrition and because of you being a dietitian, you spend a lot of time looking at what it takes to build a healthy body, and what are good things to include in a diet. And there's no question you work in the meat world.
That's right.
You work for the beef. You work for the beef producers of this great country. And you mentioned in your talk that we've been eating meat for quite some time now. We, as in Homo sapiens, as in human beings, 2.5 million years, in fact. Clear evidence of that. And so having meat in the human diet it's worked out so far.
It's pretty much stood the test of time.
Yeah,
I think so.
It's stood up for quite some time now. Yeah. However, there's been a little bit more recent studies out there that would say otherwise. And one in particular is the McGovern report, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about that? And tell me about how meat does fit into a healthy diet?
It kind of depends on how old you are, how recent you think things are, and the older I get, things seem a little bit more recent than a while back. But I think it is important context when we think about all of this discussion and attention about where is the right place for meat in a healthy diet. And we get really worked up over this and we stop and think, you know what, we've only been getting nutrition advice since the 1980 dietary guidelines of Americans for Americans came out. But we've been eating meat and nourishing with meat for many, many, many millions of years before that. So how do we kind of make all that make sense? And I think the take-home message is that nutrition science is evolving. So our nutrition guidelines are evolving. And because meat is such a staple part of the diet, it gets a lot of attention. And it becomes a hot topic debate point. And I think, though, where we are now with our understanding of science is really, at the end of the day, it's probably all about balance. It's probably the same things that we've known all along, but we certainly like to debate a lot of the pieces of it, especially when it comes to meat.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about that history that led up to the 1980s guidelines, as you're mentioning, which has kind of had a hangover effect ever since then, right?
Oh, it does. It takes a long time to overcome any kind of thinking. There's a saying, you might have heard this, is science only progresses one funeral at a time. You might have heard this, So I think early on when we started understanding nutrition science, it's a fairly new science, I think, 100 years or so. We started doing research. Some of that research showed some correlations between high meat intake and increased risk for, say, heart disease, and that started getting a lot of attention. But now, as our research methods have become more refined, and we know that things like randomized controlled trials are the gold standard test for diet, we start to see it's not as clear as those earlier pictures that painted, but it was in the 1960s and 70s where that was a hot topic area of research. We started seeing dietary guidelines being formed that started to stick, and we saw a lot of advice about cholesterol and saturated fat, which now, if you follow nutrition, you see that some of that's sort of unraveling. The cholesterol story has definitely unraveled, and there's a lot of controversy about how much saturated fat really would increase your risk for heart disease. And so I think we're starting to see a new picture painted for the way that meats fit into a healthy diet.
Well, it really started to paint a picture for me just taking my basic animal nutrition classes. And it's like, we could have asked a pig farmer a long time ago, what's going to cause some of these issues later on down the road. Now, we're trying to make those animals fat. We're trying to do certain things to them. But if we look at how the body metabolizes certain nutrients, protein especially, and some of those fats that are necessary in your diet, we have a kind of a different story now. to be telling? What should we be telling people?
I mean, you think about it, a lot of people don't even realize the fat composition of beef, for example. I think we're oftentimes use it synonymously with saturated fat that raises cholesterol. Well, half of beef's fat is monounsaturated fat. That's the fat that a lot of people are seeking out. They're looking for olive oil. They're looking for monounsaturates to add to their diet. And half of beef's fat is monounsaturated fat. And I think that's just some basic knowledge and awareness that health professionals need and consumers need and meat scientists probably even need to understand that nutrition composition of what meat really is. If you look at the composition of meat, you don't really expect it to raise cholesterol levels as much as what the media would tell you that it would. So I think there's just a lot of revisiting, but as you said, when negative information comes out, how many positives do you need to hear to recover from that? But I would say that, and this is something I like to remind folks, most of the public is very favorable to the role that meat plays in a healthy diet. They get it. They get that, yes, as with all foods, you've got to have balance. But I think they're much more favorable than maybe sometimes what we read about in the media.
Yep. You know, you're exactly right. It does make for a good story if we can affect something that is as emotional as food, and especially meat. Then it's going to get attention pretty quick. And you mentioned something, you know, how good it does make one feel in their diet or in their body if they are including meat in their diet. I mean, I have several friends, former vegetarians, that all of a sudden started feeling better once they started getting meat back in their diet and animal protein. And I talk a lot about just, you know, it's not just about protein. And we hear protein all the time. You can get a protein bar, this, that, and the other. It's not just the protein. It's what is making up that protein. Is that right?
That's right. And, you know, we're talking about being vegetarian, which is fine if that's your thing and you want to do that. I never spend a day in my life trying to convert a vegetarian to start eating meat. But I will tell you that what some data points show is the number one reason why vegetarians do return to meat eating is for health. They're not feeling well and they're looking for something better for their health, and they come back to meat eating and feel like that fulfills some of the needs that they felt that they were missing from a health standpoint. I think that's huge. When I think about what makes meat unique, what is unique about it, what it's going to contribute to your diet? Exactly right, Phil. I totally agree with you. Protein is one thing. We are high quality protein. Meat is high quality protein. But it's those nutrients. So you've got nutrient density. It's not just one or two nutrients. Beef, for example, has 10 essential nutrients that it provides in more than 10% of the daily value. So great source of nutrients and protein. And then you layer on the fact that it's great tasting. How many foods do you really, really want to eat that give you great protein and great nutrition? And then I think about for the future of the conversation around food systems and how we get to a healthier food system and a more sustainable food system. You think about cattle in particular as being ruminant animals. So now you have a package of protein, nutrient density, great taste, in an animal model or in an animal that is not competing for human food, right? So you have a really different piece that you're putting into the food system, and I think that's why it plays a unique role.
It's cliche to say, but it is a power-packed, nutrient-dense food.
It
meat,
really is.
Beef especially.
It really is.
I'm a big fan of beef.
And when you start thinking about foods that you really enjoy and you want to build a healthy diet, when I think about it as a dietitian or even as a mom, how do we make a balanced meal? How do we have a meal that everybody at the table wants to enjoy? And how do I get the kids to eat the vegetables that go with the meat that I know that they're going to enjoy eating? There's not very many foods out there that really deliver on all of those fronts. And I think that's one of the great things about meat eating and how it can support a healthier, more balanced diet, because it kind of makes broccoli a little bit more fun.
It does. It's very complimentary, in fact, even to Brussels sprouts for those who aren't maybe a fan. So we've talked a little bit about the building blocks of protein. Let's talk a little bit about micronutrients, because that's another thing that is difficult to get just from plant-based sources, but livestock can convert that into a more usable
That's right. And if you look at, there's so much attention on nutrition these days, and you look at how red meat, beef consumption has gone down over time, we're also beginning to see the consequences of that. Iron deficiency is on the rise in the United States, and we've begun to look closer at some populations, women and adolescent girls in particular, and we're seeing shortfalls of these nutrients. It's not just iron, it's zinc, it's B vitamins, it's choline during pregnancy, for example. So I think these micronutrients really the micronutrients in meat really do offset some of the shortages that we're seeing, these gaps that it can help fill in society, because our diets, let's face it, our diets aren't that great. Right?
Yeah.
They have a lot of room for improvement. Now, beef in particular, or red meats in particular, get a lot of attention that we're over consuming. But if you actually start looking at the data, we're actually eating red meats and meat right in check with the dietary guidelines recommendation. We're not off target in our meat intake. That's a big myth in nutrition. Now, what goes around that plate with our beef and our poultry needs some improvement. We need more vegetables.
Rings.
Well, the onions maybe, but and it's all about balance. But there is an opportunity to increase some of those other nutrient-dense foods that complement the nutrient density that meats provide as well.
Yeah. Well, you're right. It's that whole package. It tastes good. It's good for you. Back to the monounsaturated fats. That tastes really good. It's the one that's in some of the largest quantities in marbling, which is exactly what gives meat its flavor in many cases.
And I think about this, you're the meat science expert, but I think about how awesome is it that marbling, from a dietitian perspective, really doesn't add too much fat.
It's not.
But
no.
It adds so much flavor.
Yes.
And we can trim off the external fat. That's fine. And we can cut some calories that way. We can have a leaner piece of beef or pork or whatever. But we have that marbling in beef that just is so flavorful and monounsaturated fat. So it's got to get the best of both worlds.
Yes, absolutely. I want to touch real quick back on the nutrient content, and something you mentioned earlier in the talk that I listened to was emotional and cognitive well-being. I mean, that's big. This isn't just supplying what is necessary to keep a body alive. This is supplying what's necessary to keep the body thriving.
I mean, a lot of people don't realize, starting at around 6 months of age, we now are advising infants to get iron-rich sources like meats in their diets, because they need that iron and that zinc. And that's not just for their physical growth, it's for their brain growth as well. So meat eating can contribute to increased linear growth in young children, infants and children, but also that nourishment that our brain needs. We often talk about it, strong minds and strong bodies. And if you kind of carry that forward to the world we're all living in, it's a very stressful world to live in these days, and we think about how we define our health as adults or children or families, and that's changing. And we used to think physical health. We think about, how do I feel physically? But now health is being defined as emotional health, in mental well-being and physical well-being all together. And I think when we start looking at the role that nutrition can play and meat nutrients can play, that's an area of great research opportunity, because we already know that the iron and the zinc and the quality protein have functional roles in the brain and in our physical being. So it makes sense. And we've seen studies of iron deficient children not doing as well in school, not performing as well on math tests. So it's actual cognition and also our emotional well-being, our ability to be resilient and have grit and manage stress. I mean, these are all areas that we're continuing to understand through research.
We have to build that good foundation. You got to get the body working right, but this is going to accentuate the human experience. Like we need to have that good emotional health, that ability to think clearly. And if you give the body the right things, it's able to do that.
Yeah, and really, at the end of the day, it is about quality of life. Yeah. And that plays into the taste piece too. It's about enjoying the foods that we eat, nourishing with the foods that we eat, and being strong both physically and mentally, so we can do all the things that we want to do.
And the animal had it sitting there the whole time. Isn't that
right
great?
There for us.
Oh, it's a single ingredient. I love it. I love it. Okay. I'm going to ask just a couple more things, and you've convinced me that meat is important in the diet. It didn't take much convincing because I'm a meat scientist.
Easy target,
okay,
yes.
It was a pretty easy target.
Okay.
But, what about the physicians? how are we doing convincing them that this is a good idea?
You know, we've done consumer insights or physician insights, and you'd be surprised. Most physicians agree, and dietitians do too. Health professionals agree that meat should be part of a balanced diet. Yes, and so I think that is an opportunity for us. Now, they lack in nutrition education. They lack in specifics about how to incorporate beef, and they probably suffer from believing some of the myths about overconsumption.
They're humans as well.
Yeah, and they read the media as well, and they probably think that most Americans overconsume. So we are doing a lot of work to educate physicians. And we've got programs through the Beef Checkoff where we're able to provide science-based information, evidence-based medicine to physicians to take it into consideration. We're not telling them what to recommend. We're asking them, look at the literature and decide what you want to recommend to your patients. And what we're seeing from them is great responses that this is needed information. I think physicians are hungry for nutrition information. Their patients are asking them for advice. They don't want to take medicine if they don't have to. So I think physician education is a key component. As you know, Phil, because you helped us educate dietitians, dietitians also need to hear from meat scientists about culinary skills and cookery and even how to cut a steak can be a barrier, for them getting it incorporated into their meal planning as well. So health professional education is a key part, and we cannot educate health professionals, physicians, dietitians without good science. And that is one of the great things about the meat industry, is that what we do is based in a scientific process and research, and we have to have that research in order to be able to have a seat at the table for these tough discussions about diet and health.
Let food be thy medicine and medicine thy food, right? Shalene, how did you get to where you are right now? What got you into the dietitian role?
Well, I'm married a meat scientist. That was the first way I heard about this whole field.
What a great decision.
And, as they say, through sometimes when a door closes, a window opens. And I thought that I wanted to be a physician assistant. And I didn't end up going that path. It didn't work out to go that way. And I started back in graduate school to discover what I wanted to do in nutrition. And when I started taking nutrition, all of a sudden chemistry made sense to me, and found the field of nutrition to be fascinating. In an agricultural-based department, got to do work with eggs. And at the time, the egg industry was battling cholesterol issues. Little did I know that would lead me to the beef industry, right? So because this was a time in which there was a lot of questions about cholesterol and fat and meat, and the war on fat was happening, within the meat industry, as you guys call it. And so that led me to focus more of my research interest in animal source foods and health. And I started to discover that many of what we think and we're taught as health professionals wasn't what the science was really showing. And so started doing education with the meat industry, and eventually led the research program for America's farmers and ranchers, and have loved every minute of it.
Well, we appreciate you doing that, and definitely, carrying the banner for the farmers and ranchers out there raising beef cattle, but also for anyone raising livestock. I mean, you're telling a great message that needs to be told, and as they say, it's very easy to tell the truth.
Yeah,
this is what it is, guys.
And I think that one of the things I often tell dietitians who've come to join my team, or colleagues that I've had the opportunity to work with who also support the role that meat plays in health, is that I think I promote vegetable consumption as much as I do meat consumption. It really is, at the end of the day, about balance. But I think that meat is a food that is misunderstood. It's a food that people really love to eat. There's really good science on it. I think there's an explanation for when we see studies that don't associate meat with good health. It can easily be explained by the overall poor diet that we're looking at, as opposed to the overall healthy diet. A lot of times these meat studies that you see in headlines, they're looking at someone with a really crappy diet compared to somebody with a well-balanced diet. And I think we have to eat beef or any meats in the context of a healthy diet. But once we do that, we have great health benefits from it. And so it's an easy job to do as a dietitian, for sure.
Well, and for those the non-scientists out there, just remember, correlation is not causation. which means just because somebody ate meat and had health challenges doesn't mean there weren't other factors out there, and it's very likely there were other factors.
That's right, and that's what we see in the confusing aspects of the nutrition data. It's that when we can't tease out the individual effects of beef because we're not looking at a total overall healthy diet, I think that's more, and that's where we need more research. We need better quality nutrition research. Nutrition research is still progressing and getting better, and I think we need more tools to be able to do better quality diet and health research as well.
Well, this has been absolutely fantastic. I'm excited to see where this takes all of the scientific community. There's so much more to learn, and maybe it's not just a discovery, but a rediscovery.
Yeah, I often say, nutrition isn't revolutionary, it's evolutionary.
Yeah.
It's evolving, it's changing, right? But I'm so glad we're having this discussion because I do think we have to have meat scientists and nutrition scientists working together. They're two disciplines that can inform each other, and that's what it's been fun, even having you out with dietitians and educating them, and they really respond to that meat expertise as well. So I'm glad that we're having this conversation.
Awesome, me too. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And hopefully this does spur some more conversation in the future.
Yeah, I agree.